Sustained use of medical cannabis is not associated with changes in either brain morphology or cognitive performance. So what does that mean? Basically, it's saying that sustained cannabis use doesn't affect your ability to think. According to a study published yesterday in the Journal of American Medical Association, Network Open, researchers affiliated with Harvard Medical School and MIT collected fMRI data from medical cannabis patients at baseline and then 1 year later. Regular cannabis use can change your working memory, your executive control, which is your ability to regulate your own thoughts, emotions, or actions, and your reward processing, which is the way you learn, respond to, or anticipate rewards. There's debate as to whether regular long-term cannabis use affects your working brain negatively or positively. There's evidence for both. Most studies compare different cohorts or groups of people, but very few studies have tracked the same people over time. So that's what this study did. 44 people were scanned and tested day one, and then again 1 year later. At the start of the study, no one was using cannabis every day. Only 5% of the participants tested positive for THC, and no one was diagnosed with cannabis use disorder. So they were generally light users, light or moderate users. 1 year later, most participants had started using more frequently, and about 20% were using daily or more than once per day. The investigators did not observe functional MRI differences between baseline and 1 year, nor did they identify an association between increased cannabis use and reduced brain activation. Findings are consistent with numerous prior studies that cannabis exposure is not associated with negative effects on brain morphology or cognitive functioning in both young people or adults. One study concluded that medical cannabis patients exhibit enhanced rather than impaired executive functioning over time. Our results suggest that adults who use cannabis, generally with light to moderate use patterns, for symptoms of pain, anxiety, depression, or poor sleep, experience few long-term neural associations in these areas of cognition, concluded the study authors. Commenting on the study's findings, NORML's Deputy Director Paul Armentano said, "These study findings reinforce the fact that medical cannabis use is both safe and effective, and they belie long-standing claims that cannabis exposure is either uniquely or significantly damaging to the brain." So this is a solid study. It takes another important step toward demystifying one of the many stigmas perpetuated by the movies. In Dazed and Confused, was Spicoli's working memory really affected by his long-term cannabis use, or was that just his personality? This article has limitations. It doesn't discuss what patients were doing prior to the study. It doesn't follow them for very long, and it doesn't study heavy cannabis users. However, it does support the idea that Spicoli was exhibiting great executive functioning when he said, "All I need is some tasty waves, a good buzz, and I'm fine." Did anyone ever tell you that cannabis will damage your brain? This is Dr. Jean Talleyrand with High at 9 News.
Man, this is great news, Dr. T.
Whatever happened to "this is your brain on drugs"?
Yeah, this totally demystifies that whole "this is your brain on drugs." Any questions? Because now I have questions.
Well, they're lying to us, clearly. I mean, Nick Bradley, who is a regular audience member here and a good friend of all of us, is going through a lot of brain studies and MRIs and things to figure out a condition that he's been having. And I think he spoke to me and Dr. Mark this week and was like, "Should I stop taking bong rips before I go?" I'm like, "No, show them your brain as is. Show them like what's going on in there with all the weed. Also, it calms you down, buddy. So please take some bong rips." I think, Dr. Mark, you probably gave him the same advice.
I did. So I think it's important to note here, Dr. T, like, what is the age of these patients that they looked at?
Adults.
So were they okay? Because I'm sure you're familiar with the pioneering work of Yasmin Hurd at Mount Sinai in New York. And so what Yasmin's study has shown is that human longitudinal studies have linked prenatal and adolescent cannabis exposure with long-term abnormalities as well as increased vulnerability to neuropsychiatric disorders in adulthood. And so what's known, I've seen a little bit about this work described in a lay fashion, is that during the maturing of the brain during the adolescent years, there's a partitioning that happens naturally in the brain between what's called the gray matter and the white matter. And if I remember correctly, her studies have shown that cannabis use does affect that differentiation between white and gray matter. If I believe my memory, I think my gray matter is that there's more white matter than gray matter, and typically in a normal brain you'd have more gray matter. And I guess during those adolescent years, and again prenatal exposure too as well, could cause some abnormalities in the brain. This has been proven, and that's, I guess, part of, kind of like the other side of the coin here, which is now they're looking at adults. But I think if you look at kids, and if you're able to actually, get inside the brain like they do in MRI imaging, you'll see that there is a difference. We don't really know what the ramifications of that distribution between white and gray matter is, but her results tend to lead towards abnormalities and an increased vulnerability to these neuropsychiatric disorders. So I think the jury's still out on this.
Dr. Mark?
Well, remember, correlation is not causation. So
That's right.
The association was correlated. It wasn't proving that cannabis caused it. So I think the jury definitely is still out. As a physician, I have recommended cannabis to 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds, teenagers, all with medical conditions that benefited from it. And in these cases, the benefit outweighed any potential risk.
Right.
Some of these kids I've followed for more than 10 years, and they're doing wonderfully in terms of cognition. And so, to make the general statements that it's bad for all kids, I think leads us down a path that will hurt some of the kids who it actually benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Mark, so would you say white matter matters?
Oh boy.
I don't know, that's a gray area.
Oh,
Hey!
Man.
We have a dad in the house.
You just got bested, sir.
That's
And
cute.
I want to stop lumping. I mean, we lump all cannabis as THC.
Mhm.
It's not. There's cannabis that's high CBD, low THC.
That's right.
There's 3 types of cannabis. And
There's-
whenever people do a study, they go, you see cannabis is bad. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What kind of cannabis?
Don't forget about
They're very
THCA, Dr. T.
THCA is a component in cannabis. It's not type of cannabis. When you're talking THCA flower, you're talking type 1 cannabis, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Professor Beck in the building.
Just saying.
Jason has been fired from his professor position
Stop the cap.
and spanked by Dr. Mark.
No.
I have a question for Rico. Rico, you said you fart in the store. If you eat an edible, do you fart terpenes?
No.
Oh.
No, that's not how that
I
works,
think
Dr. Mark.
that's
You're
what I
smarter
like
than
to
that.
call.
You're smarter
I like to
than
call
that.
that.
It's not the monoterpenes. They're too volatile.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I actually fart black matter.
Oh, God. Well,
Right.
and on that, we're going to a commercial. We're going to be right back.
These guys need to wash their
Yeah,
hands.
exactly.